Lecture 3A, Constructing Culture, Part 1. This is part of a two-part lecture focusing on the introduction to the concept of culture in society. The next lecture will be about American culture specifically. It is all relative. This is such a common saying among students and faculty alike. In a sense, it's true. Each of us judges situations based on our cultural background. But take some time to dig a little bit deeper. If everything is relative based on our culture, how is it that we vary within the same culture? We can extend this discussion by saying each person brings a different set of values or beliefs into each situation. From this perspective, there is no hope for common ground, because that would mean that there are over 7 billion subcultures on the planet. The goal of this lecture is to assess the concept of culture and the ways that individuals utilize culture in their everyday lives. You will see that we may have individuality, but even this concept is culturally relative. The median is the message. Culture refers to beliefs and customs of a particular group or society. It can be both material, like in this picture, and non-material in nature. Material culture includes physical manifestations of society that symbolize its values and beliefs, while non-material culture includes those elements of culture that are not tangible, such as symbols, norms, values, and beliefs. Culture provides the tools we need to interact with each other. What tool does an iPhone or other cell phone provide you in society today? While we have discussed the components of interaction, including roles and scripts, even these components can be broken down into smaller parts. Additional components include language that we use to communicate, both verbal and nonverbal, and symbols, the clothes we wear, the stickers on our laptops, and how we say the words we say convey meaning to other people on top of our scripts. We may follow the script, but do it in a way that conveys that we really don't want to do it. Perhaps doing what our boss says, even if you dislike or disagree with her. What message does this send to other people? All of these dynamics reflect the complex cultural meanings that existed in most cases long before we entered a particular situation. In addition, the introduction of new technologies has added to this dynamic as people create new ways to convey old meanings, using emojis to reflect our true feelings or ignoring text from someone we are unhappy with. Our culture gives us a place from which to conform or rebel. We can also create culture. The culture of status. Status and roles are a second aspect of culture. They have a huge impact on our everyday interactions. The example of high-level political leaders most easily reflects this dynamic, since they wield more power than the average person. Yet, even two people of high status can reflect subcultures, living out their high status in very different ways. The King of Saudi Arabia and the Prime Minister of England have very high status in their respective societies, but the gender of England's former Prime Minister, Theresa May, speaks to the attitudes and values of the people she represents. Consider her dress, demeanor, and other attributes which reflect the culture of England and the Western world more broadly. How might the attributes that she carries impact political negotiations, if at all? Norms reflect culture. Norms include both formal and informal rules of behavior. Like roles and statuses, they can vary by culture. There is some overlap between them and some inconsistencies. While the speed limit may be posted as 45 miles per hour, it may be normal to drive faster than the posted sign. That is, most people drive faster than the law will allow. What would happen if someone drove 50 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone? The person would be considered both criminal and abnormal. Most cultures do have people who enforce norms, but it varies dramatically by society. In the U.S., we have police, but they only enforce laws, which are codified norms. That said, there is a lot of self-policing as well, using the generalized other to make sure that our speech and words reflect the expectations of our culture. It is also important to note that many people are not in a hurry to fight the norms of their society. People in a culture often adopt the expectations of society via values and beliefs, an internal set of guidelines. We may break societal rules on occasion, but that does not mean that people want to make fundamental changes in the social system. Just utilize culture as a way to make their way through social interactions. In a moment, we will review an American culture that emphasizes individualism. If your first thought about culture is that you want to resist the dominant culture, that is an American cultural trait. That said, people in every culture can maintain or change culture in each interaction. It is likely to include very small changes in time, but each person is part of maintaining or changing the system, no matter the culture you come from. High culture, low culture. Culture varies by country, but also subcultures within a country. There are different ethnic groups with different norms and values, as well as different classes of people. People with different incomes also have different cultures. Artifacts or material cultures include physical objects that reflect the personality of a group of people. Cell phones, televisions, and radios are all examples of material culture. Another form of material culture can be found in art. Famous sociologist Pierre Bourdieu conducted a large-scale study of art consumption in France and found that people with higher incomes consumed different art than working-class people. Specifically, he found that working-class people were much more likely to consume what he calls functional art, items that brought pleasure to the owner but could serve a function in some way, such as a chair. Why might this be the case? He speculated that rich people can afford to buy art for art's sake, because they can afford functional items and art, whereas working people have to be more efficient with their money. Look at this painting in front of you. Do you think this reflects high culture or low culture? Subcultures and idiocultures. Each society has a main culture and subculture or subcultures, which carry some elements of the larger culture, but some things are unique. This is almost always regional. In the U.S., the Southeast is considered different than the rest of the country, but so is the Northeast, the Midwest, and Western states. What stereotypes do you have of people from places like Texas, California, Alabama? Subcultures need not be regional in nature. Consider subcultures people associated with things like golf or video games or style of music. These subcultures transcend regional boundaries. Idiocultures are like subcultures, but exist within smaller groups of people. There may be Christian subcultures, but there are specific churches that have specific norms and values that exist only in those churches. They share elements of the larger Christian subculture, but have a unique subculture of their own. Think about all the groups that you belong to. What kinds of culture exists within each of them? If you are a traditional student, it may be a sorority or fraternity. You can easily do an ethnography right now. Pick a group you belong to and start making notes about the roles and statuses of different members of a particular group or organization you belong to, the norms that exist in that group, its values and beliefs. These will be similar to the larger organizational affiliation, such as a sorority or fraternity, but also unique to that particular group at Missouri State University. Why is all this talk of culture so important? The simple answer is that aspects of culture we belong to, the cultures we belong to, shape our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Again, we can rebel and become countercultural, but it is still something we reference for the way we do things. Alternatively, this knowledge can help you be a better member of your group or groups. How might knowing something about your idiocultures make you a better participant in those groups? Global culture. Cultures are linked to societies and countries, but it is not a perfect match. Two things you should consider. First, we are connected to other parts of the world by elements of culture that we share with them. For people in the U.S., this means Europe and some other parts of the world that share Western ideals of individualism. Second, the world can be redrawn to cluster these similarities, and we may see the world differently by looking at such maps like the one in this picture. A third point is that many people believe that the world is moving toward a global culture, which shares a significant amount in common. In the U.S., There are foods from all over the world and elements of many cultures. It is not unheard of to see Starbucks in other countries, as well as McDonald's, showing its impact on the rest of the world. It is clear that if we are moving toward a global culture, we will likely see elements of our culture in other places and other cultures in the U.S. Is a global culture good or bad? I suspect some of you believe one way or the other. Social sciences really can't answer the moral question, but it certainly can study the way that society is changing and the ways that cultures develop with those societies. Conclusions. I have found that most of the talk of culture is done as a critique, and people leave this discussion believing that they must either rid themselves of it or try to change it in some way. You may want to do this too, but also consider how useful this knowledge may be in helping you be a better member of a particular culture or group that you're in. From a scientific perspective, any one culture cannot be judged as better or worse than another, including your own. So it is up to you to decide how to best utilize this information in your own life.